Hello and welcome to Security Panel, brought to you by Celerity, the show that covers all the big topics in the cybersecurity world. I'm your host, David Taylor, and joining me on this week's episode, we have the Lead Cyber Security Analyst at Celerity, Joshua Reed, and ex-IBM VP of Sales for UK and Ireland, and current Non-Executive Director at Celerity, David Kay. But first, let's take a look at some of the recent cybersecurity news stories that have been grabbing the headlines. So, first up in the news this week is that Europol has finally taken down the Emotet botnet. This was dubbed the most dangerous malware in the world. But unfortunately, sometimes when the king falls, another arises, so we better watch this space. Elsewhere, Google security researcher Maddie Stone has found that 25% of zero-day vulnerabilities in 2020 were variants of previously disclosed vulnerabilities. On top of that, 12.5% of those were incompletely patched. So she's urging vendors to pay more attention and put more resource into fixing and patching vulnerabilities. And finally, server ransomware is back, unfortunately. The once popular form of ransomware, made so because of its as-a-service model, was sort of disappeared back in 2018. However, researchers at VMware Carbon Black found that it was the most common target in ransomware for the healthcare sector in 2020. They also found that it accounted for 58% of attacks on the sector. Now let's talk to our guests about the topic of the episode, ransomware. Let's start off with the theory of ransomware. Josh, can you explain exactly what is ransomware and how does it work?
Yeah, so ransomware is another type of malware family. It utilizes disk encryption as its primary attack method. It's usually delivered as part of a software, a lot like what Trojan is. It poses itself as legitimate software a lot of the time. The most common attack vector across most recent years has been the delivery of an email saying, please sign this document. You open the document and you're greeted with an image that says, click enable content to view this document. When you click that enable content, it then runs a macro VBS script in the background, which will go to the ransomware server and pull down the ransomware executable. When that's executed, there's dependent on the variant, there can be various different things that happen. WannaCry, for example, has, when executed, had a worm capability using the Eternal Blue exploit, which then allowed it to communicate with other systems on the local area network and spread sideways. Fundamentally, for ransomware to be ransomware, it has to be able to encrypt the disk. Once it's encrypted the disk, it will usually provide the end user or the victim with a ransom note, either in as a wallpaper on the desktop, an image, or a notepad document telling them exactly what's happened, how much money they will have to pay to release the ransom, and what the impact will be and how long they have. As I said before, the usual delivery formats are via spam emails, but there are hundreds of different delivery methods. Some like dodgy flash update websites. There will be other ones such as via shared drives. Some are delivered via Office documents, via email, or even via public sharing platforms like Dropbox. The delivery methods vary, but they usually correlate to the sender of the malware and the malware group behind it. They will have a technique that they favor.
Thanks, Josh. That's very comprehensive. Not a lot to squeeze in there. All I would add is that very often the ransomware amount is asked for in Bitcoin. That help keeps the exploiter anonymous, and very often the amounts range typically from about $500 to $2,000, but obviously in bigger scenarios, the ransomware is much higher, and this is a regular occurrence. A lot of organizations are being hit this way.
Next up, we're going to talk about the evolution of ransomware. David, how has ransomware evolved over the years?
The evolution of ransomware, and again, Josh, I think, covered a few of those, how it's developed, the myriad different ways that ransomware or the malware can be delivered. And it might be just worth, again, just going through a few of those. You may have heard these terms in passing, etc., etc. The most obvious form is email phishing, and that's been around since the 90s. And in its early days, and still now, you could see as though somebody's written a long email in Chinese or North Korean and stuck it through a translator. So very often one of the telltale signs is bad grammar or dodgy spelling. But obviously people are getting far more expert at crafting in the original English, more precise, more accurate emails, which do look very tempting as to their authenticity. And that's a big problem, because when you get to a situation as well, like a pandemic, and there's an element of panic around the user community, people can just click on an email that might say, for example, here's a way to get face masks, here's a way to get your vaccination, here's a way to get, tissues and vital provisions. So people, when they're scared, and we'll come back to the human element, I guess later on, tend to click on something even before they've finished reading it. Other terms you'll have heard around phishing. Phishing is obviously one way, and a predominant way of getting the malware onto your computer and thereafter around the network and the enterprise. Things like spear phishing, and spear phishing more accurately refers to a group, maybe systems administrators. So it's more tailored towards a particular user community, and there are again attributes to it which look as though they've got a technical gravitas to them, which might tempt you to click on them, etc., etc. You've got whaling, and whaling is where you go after the head honcho, the C-suite, the CEO, CFO, and it's very, very precisely worded. It might be that you're just addressing one organization in this scenario, and you're trying to get something like company information, tax IDs, etc., etc. There's smishing, and I fell victim to one of these. I got a text message, SMS, phishing, smishing. I got a text asking me to pay a top-up fee for the delivery of a parcel to the post office with a web link. And, silly me clicked on that thinking, actually, I am overdue a delivery of a parcel. And I got compromised. And, there are all different ways of different types of message that you'll get, which can get you doing the wrong thing. There's phishing, of course, and that's when somebody rings you up and might say, can you ring me back on this number, just to authenticate that I am the police. And I even saw on our Nextdoor app this morning, somebody had been called up by the police, dialed 999, the person hadn't clicked off, and all of a sudden she thought she was talking to the police, but she was actually talking to the guy who originally rang her, and he was asking her for, I don't know how the conversation developed, but developed into something around, could you tell me, payment ID, other personal information.
Yeah, I mean, phishing is always, it's always the entry point. It's always the initial staging ground for any ransomware attack. For a ransomware attack to be successful, usually for it to completely destroy a company, it would have to be, the ransomware would have to be installed at a very high level within the server hierarchy, within, around the domain controllers, maybe even at the backups. And that would really destroy a company, because if it's hitting their backups, they can't revert to those backups because they're compromised and polluted. So phishing is a very, very good way to start, but it's not the only way to start. There's numerous other ways of delivering it, even through USB storage, face-to-face, someone leaving their computer unlocked. It can happen, and to basically deny that it won't happen is your first mistake, because it could happen in any number of ways. Physical access to a computer is all but common, maybe not now, but in the future when we're all working back in the office. So the delivery of ransomware really is, it's redundant, the list. There's no end to it. It just continues.
Yeah, I guess another way I've seen recently is where you get people working with SEO and trying to promote a dodgy website above all others on certain searches. and then in all innocence, you might click on the top of the list website, and all of a sudden you're into a dodgy website, you know, SEO poisoning, SEO Trojans, things like that. So, and very lately, talking about the ongoing development, you've got this double extortion business, which maybe Josh could elaborate on, but just where you're threatening, you've locked down and encrypted the data so it can't be used until you get the decryption key once you've paid your ransom. But as a taster for the type of data they've got from you, they will post it. Or a subset of it, just to show how confidential that data is, almost like a double whammy. So they're exposing the data breach and hoping that encourages you even more quickly to settle the ransomware.
Yeah, that's another method that's only really come around in the last 1 to 2 years. The evolution of ransomware has really taken off, and if I will say, I think the primary reason as to why it's evolved so quickly in the last 2-3 years has primarily been down to WannaCry. WannaCry was the most heavily publicized ransomware attack in history. It got the most media attention. It was a BBC News. It hit. There was news outlets around the world reporting what organisations had been hit with WannaCry. Such big names such as the NHS, Nissan, Renault, the Russian Ministry of Defense, FedEx, they were all hit with WannaCry, and it gave a lasting impression upon not only business but the general public. And I think that almost spurred on a lot of would-be cyber attackers to almost say, you know what, I'm going to have a go at this ransomware game and see what I can get from it. And it, you know, that really sparked the almost fascination with ransomware over the last couple of years. The first recorded instance of ransomware was called the AIDS Trojan, and it was by a Harvard biologist back in 1989. He basically went to a World Health Organization AIDS convention with 20,000 floppy disks and gave it out to all the audience and basically said, look, there's some AIDS information on a floppy disk. They put that into their computer when they obviously left the conference, and it waited for 90 reboots to happen before anything happened. So after the 90 reboots, the Trojan hid in the directories. It encrypted all of the file names on the computer, and to regain access, the victim had to send $189 to PC Cyborg Group, which was the attacker. He didn't get arrested because he was unfit for court, so he wasn't able to be arrested and sentenced for what he did. But that was the first recorded instance of ransomware, and I think looking at that then and what is happening now is the development and the evolution hasn't actually changed that much. The core tactics of ransomware still remain the same, but they're adding stuff on, almost like bolt-on packages, to really develop and extend the attack process, but then also multiply the amount of money that's ransomed and the impact upon the business.
Yeah, and I just want to pick up on something that Josh said about WannaCry. One thing about it is that actually that was mainly, I think Josh would agree, a patching issue. So the exploit was only able to work on Microsoft versions that were either out of support or hadn't been patched up to the latest level, and that, I think, did show a lot of the user environments that just how important patching is. Patching as a service is now something that I know Celerity is very keen on talking to their clients about. The second thing about it, which might be a segue into the next section, is that WannaCry actually, as Josh said, did use the Eternal Blue exploit, and it just shows what's available on the dark web, which we might be coming to next, because Eternal Blue was actually developed by the National Security Agency in the US as an exploit that they were using in nation-state cybersecurity operations, and was picked up on the dark web and as we saw, exploited to a lot of cost. And if it wasn't for the guy that found the kill switch, who knows where that might have gone. And that guy, by the way, I understand, since he got everybody out of WannaCry hell, has also been doing other things on the web, which maybe not have been quite so beneficial to mankind. But that was, I agree with Josh that WannaCry absolutely brought ransomware, the impact of it, to everybody. And because of the NHS, we're not just talking about computers here. We had CT scanners, MRI machines, insulin pumps, also similarly affected. So this was not just back office admin, patient records. This was potentially frontline, the Internet of Medical Things affected, which would have had impacts on human life. So very serious.
What is ransomware as a service?
Yeah, ransomware as a service, really, it's another evolution piece of ransomware over the past recent years. The cyber attackers now looking to extend the monetary value of ransomware as a whole. Not the traditional attack tactic of just encrypting the disk is now no longer enough to satisfy the cyber criminals. They've now bolted on the data publication threat, and now they're also bolting on this SaaS model of ransomware as a service, almost selling it as software. It's only really come around since Sedanic B, Ryuk, and Phobos groups have really taken it by the helm and amplified it a lot to turn it into what it is now. On the dark web, there are almost eBay-like selling platforms for, like you said before, David, starter kits for ransomware. These are basically sold with the intention that if they're found to be used in a successful attack, the developers get a percentage of the takings from the attack if they pay the ransom, or they can pay the developers a set amount for the actual development kit. And this exploit code is really designed around, in some cases, it's almost designed around the requirements that the buyer is wanting. So gone are the days where there would only be a few hundred people around the globe that knew how to really had the skills maliciously to develop the code of ransomware. And now you've got set teams whose sole development, the development life is just making malicious software, and they've really fine-tuned that development to turn it into a real worrying state for cybersecurity. Ransomware as a service, it benefits the affiliates, so the people who are buying the software, because they don't have to, worry about developing their own software. They literally can just buy it and send it off and let it do its thing. But then it's benefiting the developers as well, because they're managing to make money from selling this platform, but then also it's allowing them to gather more money from attacks, because whereas it was only like 1 or 2 attacks a year, big attacks a year, that will soon slowly increase to 5 or 6, even up to 10 massive attacks a year, because it's so ransomware starter kits, as it were, are so readily available on the dark web, and anyone can go and get their hands on one. It's bringing ransomware to the common market, and everyone is basically lining up a queue and going, I want to get me some of that ransomware. So it's a worrying place to be. But ransomware as a service, it's adapting already existing technology and applying it to ransomware. The SaaS model has been around for decades, and now it's coming to the forefront as being really a malicious front now rather than a benefit.
I agree, Josh, and you're making some great points there about business models. Now, if this was on the legitimate internet, and people, the software as a service ransomware providers were MSPs developing a great competency in the middle and concentrating on refining the exploits, making them trickier, automating them or whatever, and then building an ecosystem of partners to take these to market. It's a very, very conventional business model, but all happening on the dark side of the web. And the only thing that will result from this are twofold. One is an ever increasing number, as you said, with a lot more frequency, and because of the ability then to work and refine on the threats and the subtlety of the ransomware exploits, at the heart, that person can just concentrate on making them far more difficult to spot, to detect, et cetera, et cetera. So it's actually a vicious spiral for me of threats happening in the ransomware sphere now around ransomware as a service.
We'll come back to the panel shortly, but before that, we caught up with Josh to hear some of his top mitigating ransomware tips. Here's what he had to say.
Hi, I'm Josh, and here are my top tips for remediating ransomware. Step 1, backup. Make sure that backups are kept off-site and offline. Make sure that there's a schedule for the backups. Make sure that they run either daily, weekly, monthly. Regularly patch the products. Patch the products that are doing the backups, and make sure that there's no easy vulnerabilities that cyber attackers can exploit. Ensure multiple copies of files are taken with 2 solutions in 2 different locations. Finally, make sure that backups are not compromised when taken and reverted to. Step 2. Prevent malware from being delivered, ran, and spread to other devices. Blocking file types on your email filters such as VBS script and macro-enabled Word documents is one such way of doing this. Blocking websites that are known to be malicious and using a proxy is another way. Use and manage of an antivirus solution and making sure that the definitions are kept up to date is important. And provide security, education and awareness training to your employee workforce to better equip them to cyber attack threats. Disable auto run for mounted media, or even better, block USB usage. Step 3. Prepare for an incident. Identify your critical assets and know what to do with them if something goes wrong. Plan for the attack, even if you think it's unlikely. Simulate the attack. Understand what needs to happen if you are attacked. Develop an internal and external communication strategy. Ensure that all the stakeholders are involved and everyone knows who needs to be contacted and at what stage in the incident. Determine how you will respond to a ransomware demand. Will you pay the demand or will you simply wait it out? Identify your legal obligations regarding reporting of incidents to regulators. And finally, develop an instant response plan, tying all of the above points together to understand and really provide a flow diagram of what needs to happen in any incident. I've been Josh, and thanks for watching these ransomware tips.
We've talked about the theory and the evolution of ransomware, but what about surviving ransomware? So a London council that was hit by ransomware last year has recently revealed that it was their older on-premises systems that was compromised and targeted, and it was these systems that hadn't yet been migrated to the cloud, even if they were planned to go. So my question is, what can be done by organizations to help secure their older legacy systems from ransomware attacks?
Yeah, whenever you come to legacy systems, it's always a sensitive topic in any organization. Within any one business, there will be that one server that it does its thing and no one wants to touch it in case it breaks and brings down the whole business, or even worse, stops money from coming in. It doesn't matter where you go in business, there will always be that one server. Usually it's running in the background, and so a lot of people won't even know it exists, but there can be easy steps taken to really really protect those systems and make sure that they are away from the prying eyes of cyber attackers. The first step would be identifying what is classed as legacy and what would be a weakness on your network. That is the toughest step that will be taken in these next few steps, is identifying what it is that is out of support, what needs to be isolated from the rest of the network, and what needs to be protected. And those 3 criteria are really key to identifying and helping you protect legacy systems. Next one would be isolating the network connection, or isolating the system from prying eyes, even from inside employees, understanding what protections and what access rights there needs to be to really safeguard that system from everyone else. The next one would be hardening and undertaking hardening exercises. There are hardening runbooks available from the Centre of Internet Security, and these come in 2 levels. So level 1, which is very basic hardening, and that will be more than sufficient for a lot of cases and organisations. Or you can go level 2, which is slightly more, slightly bigger and stronger hardening, and it will make sure that no one can breathe on a system without it being detected. It's the hardening exercise is key because you can put in all of the perimeter security controls that you want. People will still find a way in, even whether that's physical access or remote access. That they will still find a way in, and they will still find a way to break it, or even worse, install ransomware on it, and away it goes. The next one would be monitoring the systems, making sure you're keeping track of what's connecting to the system, who's connecting to the system, what software is installed on the system, when it was installed, and keeping a real close log of that, and almost viewing that within either a SIEM, a log correlator, or a monitoring platform. That is really key to that whole process. But ideally, all of this is, these are key steps, but ideally you will be looking to move away from unsupported systems, as everyone knows they pose significant threat. There is no support, they won't be getting security patches, and they're a big black hole of security, and it's a real security risk because unprotected and unsupported servers can pose significant worry and also provide an easy way in for any cyber attackers.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Josh. And I think, from your very capable technical standpoint, you've gone through all the things. The only thing I would say is, if you've got that vital server or deck of servers that, as you say, you don't even want to walk past in case the draft you create knocks them over and creates such a problem for the whole business, you might want to consider air gap. You might want to consider zero trust type of environment with those guys if it's technically possible. But clearly the smartest way is to get those migrated when and where possible to the same environment as the rest of the systems as soon as possible, so that your conventional security processes and cybersecurity defenses can encircle and encompass those as well. But I think Josh really well covered all the technical things that are around this particular type of problem.
And finally, I guess the big question on everyone's mind: what can organizations do to help mitigate the risk of ransomware attacks?
Well, let's actually pose a problem first, because I think it's a significant problem. And Josh said to start with, and I agree, that ransomware as a service particularly means that the frequency, sophistication of attacks, the artifice in presenting an attack so it's different to every single device, which can fool a lot of antivirus type conventional software, for me means that a shape-shifting virus that's even in the same exploit, in the same attack, changing to a different strain, to use a common term right now, can defeat conventional cybersecurity defenses. And I think it's a really, really, I'm just going to read a quote here from a organization that Acronis, and it says, blocking new forms of malware and ransomware has rendered traditional antivirus technology essentially obsolete and unable to keep up with the vastly increased sophistication. Goes on to say, when it comes to existing solutions and strategies, the current trends in cyber attacks all show that traditional cybersecurity is failing, usually because of weak technologies and human error, which are both avoidable. Now, we all talk about the human error, aspect, and clearly a significant amount of successful attacks exploit human error. And nothing's ever going to change that apart from repetitive training, repeated training, doing simulated phishing attacks. It's part of the induction of any new joiner of an organization. It's repeated regularly as new exploits, new types of phishing come to the market. But I actually think that there's also an issue here around a lot of the installed software suites that look at cybersecurity as a whole are probably running out of steam. They are not fully capable of providing the protection that clients need. This is why I think that there are a lot of new cybersecurity companies starting up that are looking at things like this, and it's a very active marketplace. The other thing I would say is traditional MSPs are one of the most vulnerable sectors of the industry, along with things like councils, education, universities, etc., where budgets are tight and availability of the right sort of skills are difficult to attract versus the large multinational companies. And I think that's a problem going forward, that we need some new breed of capability out there. We need to exploit artificial intelligence and other capabilities like that to become smarter at defending against these types of attacks. So I think I won't say that the future is bleak, but MSPs who can't attract talent are a significant weak link in this, and which is why I think Celerity are in a pretty good position, being a very expert MSP, but also having a very up-to-date suite of cybersecurity capability to protect their clients, and maybe can help other MSPs without helping their competitors to beat them in opportunities. But I'm sure there's a whole network of MSPs that could do with a lot more cybersecurity capability than they've currently got now.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of good human-centric points made there. I mean, how to protect against ransomware. I mean, a few of the technical ones. You've got backup, making sure that you take backups regularly, keep them off-site and offline, protected away from cyber attackers so they can't be compromised. You touched on it before, so training your workforce so that they're ready to face the threats, and really it's a good way of doing it as well, not just to ransomware but to phishing and other cyber threats, to making sure that it's really a cheaper way of enabling security within a business. And it shouldn't be done as a one-off. It should be done continuously, and it should be done alongside technical controls. It's giving you that extra layer of security rather than just that one layer of technical security. You've got that second line of defense being the user in case the technology fails, which it is bound to do. Having sufficient antivirus, and we've touched on it before that antivirus isn't enough really anymore. There are elements of antivirus which are very, very good. Developing antivirus with a centralized management solution, making sure that it meets the compliance guidelines, i.e. it's receiving definitions every day, and also making sure that you develop it in-house and really utilize blocking scripts and blocking websites as well. There are solutions out there that can do that. Obviously patching, it's a huge one, making sure that you patch stuff that's not only above a CVSS version 3 score of 7, which is what's deemed to be important and needs to be patched straight away, but there is an awful lot of low and medium vulnerabilities that are exploited by cyber attackers in ransomware attacks, because if you're going to tailor your software to exploit one vulnerability, you're going to exploit a vulnerability that might not be easy to exploit, but no one's patched it because it's annoying to patch and it's below a certain score, so it's not deemed a risk. Simple things like stopping macros running on your endpoints, making sure this can be done via group policy. Implementation of an app locker solution, making sure that there is a definitive list of what your users can download, and if they do download it, what can they do with it? Least privilege model on all endpoints. It's another one. Blocking USB access on a per approval basis. So only providing USB access if they have approval to do so and they've given justification for doing it. But I mean, the proofs in the pudding in protecting against ransomware is you need to have a tried and tested incident response plan. If you don't have an incident response plan, everyone runs around with their heads on fire when they get hit with ransomware. If you have clear steps and a definitive plan of what needs to happen when, then you can almost limit the impact of ransomware because you have almost run this incident response plan in a simulation. It's like a fire drill. If you have a fire and no one's been through a fire drill, how do they know where the fire exits are? How do they know, not to run? How do they know where to go and where they stand outside? It works on the same premise. You need to try and simulate a ransomware attack using your incident response plan so that everyone within the business knows their responsibilities and knows how to fix the problem if it does happen.
Josh, just one thing I would add in there. I mean, Celerity have been working very recently on immutable copy of data. Is that another example of an emerging type of capability that could further protect clients that Celerity has alighted on only in the last month, a couple of months maybe?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, backup solutions as a whole, in terms of ransomware, backup is your primary defense. It needs to be, there's a lot of best guidelines out there for making backups. So, obvious ones, keeping them off site, making sure that they aren't polluted when you take them. So scanning them as they're backed up. Almost taking two copies, so one with one solution and another with another. Making sure that you don't have one backup solution that has all of your backups, because if that gets compromised, you ain't got any backups to revert to, and your company's data is lost. But backup really is it's the get out of jail free card, as I like to term it, because if you've got a solid backup that is safe and you can revert back to when everything is encrypted, then you basically just waved bye-bye to the cyber attacker, because the cyber attacker, he can't ransom you for as much money anymore because he knows that your systems aren't under a holder anymore. The problem is a lot of ransomware, it writes itself to the disk and then it can wait up to 3 months before it's executed, which is a real problem. And a lot of ransomware, especially in the RAS stuff, so the ransomware as a service, a lot of ransomware solutions, they have inbuilt inbuilt like timers almost, and they will wait until a set period of time before they almost explode, as it were. So that it means that when you revert to backup, that initial executable is still sitting there in the directories, and it's just waiting to go off again. So it's making sure that your backups are clean and not polluted. And immutable is another way of doing it, it's another method of doing backups which can help. I think backup is really the primary defense against any ransomware attack.
And that's all we have time for in this episode. Remember to join us next time for more security panels. And as always, get in touch with Celerity if you have any cybersecurity needs. Until next time, take care.